Hi everyone, it's Mike here. So we're on day 5 of my Lost Mojo Colour Therapy series, and today I'm tackling the colour. So just before we get started, I just have to explain what's about to happen. After I've filmed the project, which is now complete, I brought all the video into my computer that you can see behind me, and there was no audio. So I'm going to have to narrate over the top, but also I think what I'll do is, because it is quite a long one with the amount of painting that I've actually done, that I will probably also speed it up. I'm aware and conscious that the previous videos have been around about 40 minutes long. So let's see if we can cut this one down a little bit, try and segment it a little bit, and maybe just speed it up and add a little bit of music in the background. So once again, working in my large Dilutions art journal. So I've pulled out all of my supplies that are orange or coppery orange and slightly orange browns, just to kind of give me, quite a few bits and pieces to work with. So we've got Faber-Castell Pitt pens, the large ones. I've got lots of acrylic paints there from various different manufacturers, and I'm also going to be using some tissue paper. So I've got some Tim Holtz Carte Postal, or the Postal tissue paper, that I'm also going to use in the background for this art journal page. So I've torn a sizable chunk of the tissue paper off, just enough to cover the entire double page spread. So I'm just going to fold it in half just to make it a bit easier to stick down. I'm going to use this Dale Arowney matte medium as my glue. So I'm going to put a sizable amount onto the page and then glue the entire thing down, and then put a coat over the top to seal it in place. So once the tissue paper has been completely glued down and sealed on top, I'm going to bring out my heat gun and give it a real good blast to make sure that it's all completely dry before moving on to the next step. I'm going to start adding some colour to the page now. So I've got the Dina Wakley Media Cheddar, which is a nice kind of darkish brown, but I've also got the Penny, which is a copper coloured acrylic paint, metallic, just to add a little bit of bling into the background and a little bit of variation in the colour tone. And I'm going to smooth it all out using a baby wipe. once I'm happy with the way the paint's all gone down, I'm going to grab a clean baby wipe, just give my fingers a quick clean to remove off any of that excess paint, because knowing me, I'll end up with it in my hair and on my clothes. I'm then going to grab the heat gun, give it a blast, make sure it's all nice and dry before moving on. Next up, I'm going to add some more background texture by using this large 12" by 12" stencil from Finnabair and Prima Marketing, and I'm going to be using the Dina Wakley Media Tangerine acrylic paint just to add some subtle detail or some subtle layering in the background. As you can see there, it's not really in your face. It doesn't pop from the page. It does blend quite nicely into the background. It adds some, some subtle variation in that background. And because it's orange, when it does dry, it does go a little bit darker too. So it does blend in a little bit more than what it shows right this very minute. So once I've added all those circles, there's a little bit of a circle motif going on with this one. I'm going to just bring up the heat gun, give it a blast, and then we'll be ready to move on again. Now that it's dry, you can see that shine from the copper metallic paint underneath. In hindsight, I probably should have used the copper paint on that circle stencil rather than in the background, but hey ho, you live and learn. So I've got a piece of watercolour cardstock here that I've cut a quarter circle, and I'm just drawing the outline around that. So that's going to be the base for my focal points. I'm going to put two, one in the top left hand corner as well, and these are going to be my main two focal points for this page. So I have a plastic paint palette which I've just got to my right hand side that I'm going to just mix a lot of the orange paints that I've pulled out from my supplies to get different shades of orange. I'm going to be mixing in a few browns as well, but this process is probably going to take, well, this is going to be the longest part of doing the art journal page, is doing these two focal points in the bottom right and the top left hand side. So I'm just going to keep quiet for a while and I'm just going to allow you to watch the creation of these two focal points as I paint them onto the pages. So as I'm doing these two focal points, you will see me flip the book backwards and forwards and upside down because it's just a little bit easier to add the paint. With me being right-handed, it's easier to do it from that right-hand side rather than try and reach over to the left to paint it. So I'll be adding colour, blending colours, adding lighter tones, adding darker tones, using the acrylic paints that I've got to hand, which are just off camera right at this very moment. So I'm just going to, like I said, just carry on with the painting, just start building up all the different layers that I want to add.
So at this stage, I'm pretty happy with what I've created so far, and I know that I can't carry on with these two focal points until the paint is totally dry. So at this point, I put down my paintbrush and pick up the heat gun and give it a real good blast to make sure it's all dry before moving on to the next step. So once those two quarter circles are dry, I'm going to use those Faber-Castell artist pit pens, the big brush ones, which is India ink, so permanent when dry, but when wet you can move them with your finger and blend them, which makes them brilliant for working on a non-porous page, which mine now is because I've got all that acrylic paint on. So my next task for this art journal page is to start adding in some of the detailing on those two focal points. So this is where I start adding in most of the highlights and the lighter paint. So I've brought in white, which I've mixed with just a tiny amount of orange, just to kind of tone it in as best I can. I'm using a smaller paintbrush just to use fine detail lines, but I don't want perfect straight lines, so I'm going to do it all freehand without using a ruler or anything like that. So I don't want it to be perfectly uniform and exact. So as you've probably gathered now, I've painted a couple of orange segments. So now that I've done that bottom right, I'm going to flip the page around and do exactly the same thing for this side. So fairly happy with the way this is turning out, but it wouldn't be an orange slice if you didn't have a little bit of a pip showing in there too. So just adding in just a hint of one in that corner. So just as a finishing touch for my orange segments, I'm just adding in a few little white highlights just to kind of give it that impression that the light is glinting off the moist parts of the orange slice. So for the next part of the art journal page, I want to add in some white into that centre section of the page. To do that, I want to add some white splatters. So this will also give it the impression of either bubbles or maybe bits of sparkle, almost like you've got two pieces of orange floating in a drink. So now that my little white splatters have been added, I need to get them nice and dry before I can move on to the next step. So just want to add a little bit more shading, a little bit more detail just to my orange segments. So I'm just going to use one of those Faber-Castell artist pens just to add a bit more colour and a bit more depth. Plus using one of the Signo white opaque rollerball pens just to add a few highlights. So once that's done, it's time to add my quote, my little phrase for the art journal page. And in keeping with the previous pages that I've done, I've printed off these on sticker paper on my computer and obviously used sympathetic coloured text to do it. So this now reads, "Orange can be bitter and sweet," which it can be. So once again, using those Faber-Castell artist big brush pens just to add some depth and a little bit of shading around the boxes just to make them pop a little bit from the page. So once that shading's been added, I'm pretty happy with the way this page has turned out. Not the best painter on the planet, but I'm happy with my orange segments and the way they've turned out. So just adding a little bit of detail in here, just a little bit more depth just around the edges of those orange segments. And that's me pretty much done. All I have to do now is just to sign and date it, and then this page is complete. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, share the video with all your friends, and if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel already, you can do so by clicking the button at the end of the video. That's all from me for now. I'll be back again tomorrow with my least favourite colour in the entire world, purple. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my angels, because without you, these videos would not be possible. Thank you.